The game of chicken being played between the owners of TikTok, ByteDance, and the US government is about to come to a head as the deadline for the company to either divest or shut down looms this weekend. Last week, the Supreme Court heard cases against the ban, including one in which my company, Base Politics, is a plaintiff, but has yet to issue a verdict. Many expect the court to defer to the Biden administration due to its completely unproven claims of a national security threat, while others think that the conservative majority, bolstered by President Trump's newfound favorability towards the app, as well as the significant, very good free speech arguments that are within my case and others against the legislation, will lead them to overturn it or at least put the decision's timeline further out. But whatever happens, TikTokers have decided to take matters into their own hands and have landed on one of the funniest forms of revenge against their own government I can think of. Before we jump in today, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics. Welcome to my channel where I give you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. Before we jump in, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and of course, hit that notification bell so you never miss one of my episodes. So if you go to your app store right now, this is the top app in the store, meaning Americans are downloading it in droves in preparation for TikTok's demise. It's a Chinese app. I'm not going to attempt to say the original pronunciation, but the name translates to Rednote in English, and users have been nicknaming it China's TikTok.
Rednote being the #1 downloaded app in the App Store right now is probably the funniest thing Americans have done in a long time. That's the funniest option that we possibly could have chosen. Because what do you mean you're going to ban an app because it could possibly be manipulated by a foreign adversary, the CCP, just for your citizens to turn around and download an app that is directly owned and operated by the CCP? That is just so funny to me. What's even funnier, not even 3 scrolls in and I was already getting a Mandarin lesson. In English, they're already teaching us Chinese. And what I find very interesting is the app's population is just Chinese and Americans, right? And I don't think in the history of social media have Chinese and Americans been able to come together on the same platform and just talk. Because it really puts into perspective how much your government tries to make you hate each other and tries to vilify the Chinese people. But when you're able to just read what they're saying and see a comment section from actual Chinese people, oh my gosh, it's just, I don't know, it just puts a new perspective on things, right? In these comments, Chinese people have the funniest sense of humor. I would have never known that Chinese people are that funny. You see the Europeans in comments, and it's never funny. It is never funny. I've never met a funny European in this comment section on this app. But the first comment section I translated to English, and I'm dying. They're so funny. So anyway, I just think it's so ironic and funny that you're gonna try to ban an app because you're afraid of the Chinese Communist Party, just for your citizens to download an app directly from the Chinese Communist Party. And not only that, they're going on this app, they're seeing that, oh my gosh, Chinese people aren't the enemy. My government's been lying to me. They're just average people. We're all just humans floating on a rock. And at that, they're funny. And they're teaching me Mandarin. And they're teaching me Chinese culture. It hasn't even been 5 scrolls. That is, oh my God, that is so funny.
Like, these idiots in Congress have overplayed their hands so bad because, as I've said, and I've done more in-depth deep dives into this if you want to go back and watch them, but this TikTok ban had everything to do with blocking our free speech, okay? There has never been any proof that there's a national security threat. In fact, their briefs that they submitted against us in our cases were completely redacted, which is just like so deeply unserious and hilarious. They've never come close to proving that. And if they actually thought that, then why weren't they banning all of these other apps that are owned by Chinese companies that would also have to share their data if asked, like Temu, right? They haven't done that because this isn't about a national security threat. It's about banning TikTok specifically. The legislation makes that very, very clear. And the reason that they want to ban TikTok is because they are threatened by the speech that we are sharing on there. They're threatened by people's ability to organize, to collaborate, to learn from one another. And what I actually love about this, about Americans going and downloading Rednote, is not only that it like sticks it to those lawmakers in a very, very funny way, but it also undermines their overall goal, because now you have Americans who are sharing information with Chinese people. And it makes me think of like the Tower of Babylon in the Bible, right? When humans all spoke the same language and were able to build tremendous buildings and do really amazing things together. And then their languages were scattered according to the Bible because they were becoming too powerful. They were becoming like God. And so if people within different countries have that ability to start talking to one another and getting around the propaganda that their governments spew, imagine what we could achieve in actually fighting back against these awful, terrible people who run governments across the globe. And I want to be clear, I think the CCP is disgusting. It's an abhorrent, inhumane, foul government. It's dirty, it's deceitful, it's deadly. I hate their guts, and I hate their guts on behalf of their people. But you know what? I could say those same things about the US government. I have said all along, I am far more concerned with what the US government does to spy on me and how it uses my information and my data than I am China pushing a certain algorithm that maybe pushes some thoughts over others. I don't even think it's true. Like TikTok is pretty censorious in some ways, but I've been able to get capitalist, pro-capitalist content off the ground there as easily as anywhere else, especially compared to some American companies. Not only did the idiots in Congress way overplay their hands, and this is backfiring majorly against them, so did many of the private interests who were quietly lobbying for this ban behind the scenes. Mark Zuckerberg, especially, because Meta was very involved in trying to get TikTok banned. This was openly known in DC. And like, sweetie, it's not going to pan out for you. The people hated you before, but now they are out for your blood. Like, there is no way these people on TikTok are coming back to Facebook or Instagram, period, but especially after this move.
Imagine being Mark Zuckerberg spending 7 point whatever million or billion dollars lobbying the United States government to pass a bill that bans an app because it's taking business away from it. Just to have the United States population mass migrate to the Chinese version of TikTok and give all of our attention and energy to the same country they're banning the app for, claiming it's not safe. I'm sorry. This is too funny. Oh my god. And you know what? I just linked into my link tree. I signed him on Rednote too. Oh my god. The level of unhinged American Rednote TikTok refugees. The fact that we're calling ourselves refugees! Okay, I gotta go. I can't do this. This is ridiculous. It's so funny. It's so full of karma. I would love to be Mark Zuckerberg waking up to the news this morning. Okay, I gotta go back to work.
Hysterical, so deeply unserious, but very, very funny. And I just think this TikTok ban is example number 1000 for why we need age caps on politicians. We have age caps for how old you must be to run for office. We need age caps for when you're done and you got to go, because these bozos, they don't even know how to send an email, and yet they're trying to come in and regulate complicated algorithms. And it's just utterly ridiculous. I mean, they really don't know what they're doing. They have no business being in charge of these kinds of systems. They are so out of touch. And I just love that this is coming back on their heads in this way, because anybody could have predicted this is what Americans would do and that this would be the end result, except for people who are so out of touch that, like, literally some of these people have been found in nursing homes, missing for months, still in office, and we're just like MIA until someone dug up the fact they were actually in a nursing home. Like, this has got to stop. I am optimistic that the Supreme Court will see this as the ban on free speech that it is. I have not given up hope. I don't really care, if I'm being honest. I don't care whether or not TikTok's around, honestly. Probably my quality of life would improve because I would stop getting sucked into its algorithm and watching it for hours and hours. But I care a lot about free speech precedent and what happens around free speech in this country, which is why I decided to sign on as a plaintiff in the case that I'm on. And I am hopeful that for those very serious repercussions, that the Supreme Court will do the right thing.
I'm ready to make my predictions in the TikTok case, and it's probably not what you expect. You see, national media is saying that the Supreme Court somehow signaled that they were going to uphold the TikTok ban and make TikTok go away. That was not my takeaway. My prediction is that they will cobble together a majority that provides an administrative stay or an injunction, send it down to the lower court for more discovery and a more thorough investigation of the facts of the case, ultimately just delay what's going on. In the meantime, Trump may intervene. There may be factual findings at the lower court that may help TikTok or may hurt TikTok, but I think we're going to get more time. Let's go through the justices individually so I can tell you why I think that. Let's start with the people who are not going to help save TikTok. First of all, we have Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice Thomas clearly believes that the common carrier doctrine applies. He does not think there's any problem with regulating social media. He does not believe that regulating social media implicates free speech at all. That is clear from some of his prior decisions. It's clear from the questions that he asked in court. Second is Justice Elena Kagan. Justice Kagan is the one who asked whether or not we couldn't just put the algorithm out on open source. Justice Kagan clearly does not understand the technical issues in this case and is just not buying it. Next, I'm going to list the justices that I think are ready to go ahead and overturn this TikTok ban as unconstitutional, or would at least be willing to give us an administrative stay for more time to get things worked out. First of all, we have Justice Neil Gorsuch. Justice Gorsuch made it pretty clear throughout the entire hearing with all three parties that he sides with the creators and that he sides with TikTok. I think that he would vote to overturn the ban as unconstitutional. Second, we have Justice Jackson. Justice Jackson asked some really hard questions of the TikTok and ByteDance lawyers, but she also asked some really hard questions of the government lawyer. At one point in her questioning of the government lawyer, she says, it's pretty clear that these regulations are content-based, and I just don't see how you can get around that. Next, we have Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Yes, Justice Sotomayor has one of the most quotable questions from that oral argument, where she seemed just absolutely shocked that TikTok wants to have access to our contacts. And she doesn't seem to understand that all of the apps on our phone are doing that. However, in her questioning of the government lawyer, she gave this example. She took it back to the non-digital times, and she talked about communist propaganda in the 1950s. And if there were an international communist organization working with a domestic communist organization, what extent could the government regulate that speech? The government lawyer said that that speech couldn't be regulated because that would violate the First Amendment. Justice Sotomayor said, well, then you've given it all away. Justice Sotomayor also said it's very hard for her to separate out the data collection issues from the content-based restrictions, but that she made it pretty clear that she thinks that these are content-based restrictions. And finally, we have Justice Alito. Justice Alito famously said, seems like TikTok is like an old white shirt that you don't just want to get rid of. Maybe something better is out there. However, Justice Alito also said that it's pretty clear that these are speaker-based restrictions and that they deserve the strictest kind of scrutiny. Justice Alito said that speaker-based restrictions are almost always viewpoint-based restrictions, and that court has hardly ever upheld any kind of viewpoint-based restriction. He also specifically asked whether or not they can give an administrative stay. I think that he's going to vote for a stay. Next, let's get to the maybes. These are the people that I can't quite make a prediction on, but all we need is one more in order to get us our stay, more time, or to just overturn the law altogether. Justice Roberts gave everybody a hard time about something. It was really difficult to tell what exactly his position would be. He was bothered by the secret evidence. He also seemed to want more information about the facts. At one point he asked to what extent the Chinese government actually had control over ByteDance and the algorithm. I think it's entirely likely that Justice Roberts wants more information, would issue a stay, and send it back to the lower court for more fact-finding. However, given some of his other questions, I'm going to put him in the too close to call category. Justice Kavanaugh is next. Justice Kavanaugh seemed really bothered by the data collection issues, but also said he doesn't think the government can get around the fact that this is a content-based restriction. Justice Kavanaugh also specifically requested about whether or not a stay would be effective. I think he's going to vote for a stay, but I think it's too close to call. Finally, Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Justice Barrett seemed to have a very firm grasp on the technological issues and asked excellent questions of all parties. He specifically focused on the right to receive information that Americans and the creators have, which none of the other justices asked a lot of questions about, and I think is one of the strongest arguments. Will that be enough to carry the day? I don't know. So I'm going to put her in the too close to call category.
So yeah, I think that's a pretty good debriefing of what the questions and arguments that were being posed during the oral hearing sounded like last week, and where it seems like the judges are kind of falling. So we will see what happens, but no matter which direction it goes as far as TikTok's fate, this has been a wake-up call for a lot of normies politically, and honestly, I kind of love seeing people get radicalized against their government.
America is so out of touch. Our government, I'm convinced, loves and thrives seeing us unhappy and seeing us struggle and seeing us poor. Because after the hearing with SCOTUS and listening to the way those judges don't even know what an algorithm is versus an app, they probably don't know the difference between Wi-Fi and 5G, and they're talking about, oh, you can just do another algorithm like it's going to the grocery store to just buy something. Seeing that Rednote, another Chinese app, which is owned and hosted in China, is the #1 app on the App Store today, is just beautiful. It's the most ironic icing on the cake for this government, because you're trying to take down the app that actually is safe, where all the data and servers are here in Texas, that has been proven to work in this country for the last 6 years. Now, Americans are going to another Chinese app that is actually in China. Sooner or later, Americans are going to be extremely fed up, and something's got to give. So as they say, let them eat cake.
He is not wrong. They are so out of order passing this kind of thing. Not only is it a blatant attack on free speech, specifically political free speech, not only is it an attack on people's ability to organize, so freedom of association, their ability to build coalitions and organize for certain causes, it's also a tremendous impact on small businesses, on independent contractors, on people who have now either turned to making their living off of this app in some form or another, or who are subsidizing their living off of this app. Like, this has been life changing for so many people. It's literally created an entirely new internet ecosystem. And the fact that they are so callously coming in and undercutting that, it is going to piss people off permanently, as it should, because people have sacrificed. They've worked really hard to build up what they have on many of these platforms. They've left other opportunities. They've invested their money. They've built their business and marketing strategy around what they have created. And all of a sudden, your government just comes in and takes that from you overnight. Like, yeah, these people are going to be radicalized. And it's not just its impacts on business, it's also its impacts on mental health. It has made therapy much more accessible for many people. It's had a huge impact on relationships. I mean, just the ability for other women to educate younger women about warning signs in relationships and red flags and signs of abuse has done so much good for so many women, me included. I mean, I think it is just so empowering, the kinds of information that's being shared there. People have learned how to do things for themselves again, how to build things, how to fix their homes. Like, it is giving people the tools they need to create better lives, and again, to fight back against the status quo that has kept many of us on a hamster wheel of consumerism, just trying to keep our heads above water. And that is what they are also undercutting. Like, this is very, very serious and malicious stuff. And I think it's interesting to note that the politicians and many boomers who support them are openly saying that this is what they're worried about, right? They're saying, like, oh, it's a national security threat. But when you really start digging into that, they'll say, we don't want the young people hearing the information that they're being fed on this app, which is just so interesting, because the information they're being fed is not that of Chinese party officials. It's not that of even the Chinese people. This is Americans accessing the speech of other Americans. And so what you're really concerned about is the ability for Americans to influence one another, because the elites and the government no longer have this throttle on information. There used to be like 3 TV channels, a handful of newspapers, and they were able to control the information. They were able to set the narrative. They were able to squash dissent. They even decided which letters to the editor pushing back on what they published got published, ever saw the light of day. That was pretty much the only ability people had to actually contribute in the public square. And now that the lid has been blown off of that, it is that that concerns them. It is that that freaks them out. The fact that women are hearing other women saying, hey, you know what? You shouldn't be married just to be married. You shouldn't have kids unless you find a partner who's going to pitch in and actually do a lot of the labor. All of a sudden, you've got gender dynamics that are being influenced. You've got people coming in and saying, hey, you know what's really corrupt? Our government did this and you should pay attention to it. And these are the lawmakers that are doing it. And the mainstream media isn't covering this, but you need to pay attention to this. And all of a sudden, you've got a political shift that the politicians weren't calculating for. This is the stuff that they are afraid of. It is inherently a attack on free speech to ban this app. They know that. That is why they've only tried to ban TikTok. And I saw this video of a young woman circulating, calling these things out, naming this as exactly for what it is. And it was so interesting to me to see how enraged older people, particularly boomers, were getting in response to this video.
Fascist countries ban apps. Fascist countries ban websites. Fascist countries ban apps and websites under the guise of threats to national security, when every other country knows it's about suppressing the free speech of its citizens. If the government believes that a single app could, quote from the hearing on the 10th, skew the perspective of American citizens to be anti-American, maybe the real problem is that American citizens are already in such a state of political unrest and unhappiness that our government is scared a single foreign influence could tip the scale and have it all be over. Don't you think that by taking away the, and I quote, key communications channel of Americans, it's gonna make those 170 million Americans a little more anti-American? Maybe Congress knows and understands that. Maybe the government knows that the backlash it will receive from banning TikTok does not outweigh the threats that come with its existence. Not in a matter of national security, but in a matter of being the most popular news and media outlet that the government cannot control, like American-owned broadcasting networks and publications. Maybe, if this was actually a national security concern, the government would be banning all Chinese-developed apps, like Shein and Temu, that collect the exact same amount of data as TikTok. Because maybe it knows TikTok is something special. You can't politically organize on Temu. If TikTok goes dark, the government deliberately and knowingly took away your free speech. Do not accept national security for an answer, ever.
So boomers were so pissed. Like, this is going all over Twitter right now. They're like, this little girl is just proof of why TikTok needs to go away because people don't have critical thinking skills. This is just showing that the kids are being brainwashed on TikTok. Like, sweetie, you are the one that's brainwashed and you need to sit down. And I'm going to say this very clearly. I have some boomers in my audience who I know are like the good guys who I like, but your generation as a whole is trash. You have ruined this country. You have sold us out every single time that you felt even an inch of fear. You have traded liberty for security, and it has never made us safer once. You have had the worst judgment of every single generation that has ever existed. You have contributed to the massive explosion in the growth of government, in the debt, in the inflation that we all live with. You don't have wisdom. You don't have discernment. And if you think what she's saying is somehow her being brainwashed, like, you're the one that's brainwashed. You've been brainwashed into being a little sheep puppet that just goes along and supports whatever your government tells you they need to do because you're not smart enough to think for yourself and see through the fear-mongering for what it is. She's spot on. Fascist countries ban speech, ban apps, control information. Our Constitution was put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen here. And that is what we are fighting for when it comes to these court cases right now. Like, these old people were literally sharing memes like this about her, making fun of her, like, leave the multi-billion-dollar company alone. And that's not what she's saying. She is defending free speech. You're the person who's so blinded as to think that because it's the free speech rights of a company being attacked, it doesn't matter or doesn't have a legal precedent that will impact you down the road. Completely short sighted. But like I said, that's how this generation has been for some time. That's mostly who's in power now, both when it comes to the people who are in office and the people who are voting and propping up the system. And these people have been wrong over and over, and they have sold our country out consistently, including allowing things like the Patriot Act. And I just think it's so interesting that these people can't connect the dots and see how you paved the road for this. You seriously expect young Americans to care that maybe some foreign government is looking at our data when you have created a landscape where we've had zero privacy and zero data since 9/11.
This sudden shift we are seeing of users from TikTok going to the Chinese app Rednote is a fascinating and stark commentary that speaks to a significant failure on part of the US government that started over 20 years ago. So back in the aftermath of 9/11, the US government introduced this thing called the Patriot Act, and it operated under the assumption that members of the American public would be okay with giving up their privacy in the interest of security. We could ensure national security by having more access to information that could expose potential threats to that national security. Which means at the time, the government leveraged your privacy as an individual, as a human being. And they said, that's not worth it. It is more important that we guarantee security, that we guarantee safety, which means that your phone calls and your text messages and your emails and your data was free for them to access, as long as it meant that they got to ensure security and safety. And what resulted from this is an entire generation, in fact, 2 generations, who have grown up in an environment where they have been told and conditioned to believe that their data, their information, is not sacred. It is open for access. It is constantly being leveraged in this interest of security, which means to them, it has no value. This entire aged range of people who know they are being constantly surveilled, who know that they are being watched all the time and that their data is being monitored all the time, don't care about it. What they do care about is who has access to it and what they're doing with it. And they choose to be defiant in light of that when their individual rights are infringed upon. This means that the US government overplayed their hand by saying TikTok is taking user data and giving it to China, giving it to the Chinese government. They revealed, we value that, even though we know that's not actually what it is. But this gave us, all the people here, the power to say, it's our data. We can do with it what we want. So this massive move over to Rednote is a huge, incredible act of defiance in light of this idea that, like, well, yeah, it's our data. We can give it out. We just don't want you to have it. Or not so much, we don't want you to have it. You can no longer control it. You've raised us to believe that you get free, unfettered access, and now we are saying no. So let this serve as a reminder to you all, you have more power than you think, and you have way more power than they want you to have.
Obviously, given the fact that Rednote has owners with even closer ties to the CCP, it does beg the question, like, couldn't this app also be banned? The second most popular app right now is Lemon 8, which is also owned by ByteDance, but has not been banned. And the answer is technically, but it's not that likely because, as I've already mentioned, this has only been used to target TikTok. That's very explicitly clear in how the legislation was written, which is actually just like a very corrupt way to write legislation, period. I fundamentally don't think that legislation should ever be written to just benefit one company or target one company. A good law should be applicable for all. I think it's like they have a good argument under the 14th Amendment that this is unconstitutional as well for that reason. But that being said, I did want to cover the legal side of this. So, according to this reporting, like TikTok and Lemon 8, the short answer appears to be yes, that Rednote could be banned like TikTok. However, it is not as straightforward as it is for TikTok and Lemon 8, whose parent company, ByteDance, is named in the law. Experts noted that the law gives the executive branch the authority to deem a country a foreign adversary, and that in doing so, it can choose to ban an app that comes from that country. In this case, China is already deemed a foreign adversary in the TikTok ban, and therefore the executive branch could theoretically decide that other apps from China must be banned. But lawmakers who crafted the bill said in interviews with the Washington Post that while it could be used for foreign-controlled social media platforms, the core intention of the ban was to target TikTok and its sister applications. So yeah, unlikely it'll get targeted because, again, this is about TikTok, not other Chinese apps, because it's not about security threats from China, it's about a control threat from all of us. All right, guys, I hope you liked this episode. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you have not already. And if you want even more content, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok.